2013. This is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Pope Runyon, and tonight we present a speculative discussion on the ancient Phoenician god Dagon and his counterparts in Mesopotamian, Hindu, and African mythology. We will explore his connection to astrology and the Kabbalah. He was the father of Baal. He is the god of the maritime Philistines and probably a legacy from Atlantis. The concept of Dagon's reincarnation in later humans as a sort of spiritual bloodline will be considered. So, as we said in the abstract, tune in and find out what might be swimming in your think tank. Now, like Alec Baldwin says, what's in your wallet? All right. Now, this is going to be a very, very speculative discussion, and we are going to, as I'm sure some of you who are knowledgeable about mythology or will become so after we present this show, we'll find a lot of things that we're sort of putting together our own way. Now, along that line, let me say this. The great French historical novelist Alexandre Dumas, he was once asked by a reporter, or interviewed by a reporter, and the reporter asked him, he said, "Monsieur Dumas, it has been said that you have raped history." And Dumas smiled and he said, "Oh, yes, but I have produced a beautiful offspring." Now, it may be said, of course, of us in the OTA that we have raped mythology, but we think we produced a very nice offspring. Anyway, the reason why I mention that is because Dagon, way back in Ugaritic, that's back in the time of Melchizedek, Ugaritic, Canaanite mythology, or Proto-Phoenician mythology, Dagon was not a fish god or a amphibian, or he didn't have very much to do with the water. He was what they call a corn god. I'm still trying to figure out where you get corn in the Middle East, but that's what they called him. They called him the corn god, and yet he has come down to us through various transmutations as a sort of a marine spirit, and the Philistines, who, by the way, you're familiar with the Philistines in the Bible, of course. Remember Samson? Samson tore down the gates and ripped down the temple, and the temple of Dagon, by the way, and all of that. But the Philistines actually were, according to archaeological extrapolations and anthropological conjectures, they were Achaean Greeks, in other words, and probably, Mycenaean or Achaean Greeks. And therefore, they had a maritime culture, and Dagon, in their sense, was related to the ocean. So, taking that approach, we consider in our modernized, reconstructed, reconfigured, operative Phoenician mythology, we see Dagon as a god of the sea, and we relate him, of course, to all the way back to Atlantis. Now, that's what we do. Anyway, I want to point out too, while I'm discussing it, as most of you know, we do our version of Canaanite seasonal ceremonies on the solstices and the equinoxes. In other words, we have them arranged in the classical Hermetic solar cycle. Now, one of my colleagues, who has a Canaanite group in the Midwest, he pointed out to me, he said, "Oh, come on, Poke." He said, they didn't do their, ancient Canaanites didn't do their seasonal ceremonies on the solstices and the equinoxes. They did them in accordance with the actual seasons and planting times and all that. And I told him, I said, "Steve," I said, "I know that. But we're a Hermetic tradition here, and so like everything else, like even Jesus got hermeticized. The great Neoplatonic Hermetic engine just about grabbed and everybody, including the Masons and whatever, and they were all hermeticized, including ancient Canaanite mythology. So that's the way it is. And here again, as I said, like Alexander Dumas, he said, "Oh yes, I have reaped history, but we produced a usable offspring." Let's put it that way. Okay, so that considered, now we're going to talk about Dagon and all of the little Dagons and all around the ancient world, and where they came from, or where they may have come from, and the significance behind them. Now, as I said, the god Dagon and his counterparts in Mesopotamian, Hindu, and African mythology. Well, let's start with Mesopotamian, because that is the most important. And then we'll deal with the other two once we get the Mesopotamian aspect developed here. Way back in the beginning, and that goes way back, of mythology in the Tigris-Euphrates area, back before the Akkadians and before the Babylonians, and all that, we had a mysterious race of people called the Sumerians. And now nobody knows quite who they were, or even, we know they were human, but I mean, we don't have a really racial handle we can put on them. Well, they were the first in that area, and this was about 4000 BC. Now, granted, we know there were civilizations actually earlier than 4000 BC. There was up in Anatolia, that's modern-day Turkey. We have a city now that's 11,000 years old. It's actual city. So we know that 4000 BC is not anywhere near as far back as we used to think it was. However, that said, it's as far back as we have any kind of written record of. Now, granted, we have these earlier civilizations, like the ones in Turkey, Cataluyuk, and this one they have just recently discovered, and there's pretty good evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that the Sphinx is about 11,000 years old. So, but we don't have any records, even any mythology recorded from that time. So, these Sumerian clay tablets, or clay tablets at least about the Sumerians, or copied from the Sumerians, is about as old and as far back as we get, as far as history is concerned. So, if you want to call it history. So, let's look at the origin of their civilization. And their civilization was supposedly founded, and this is not terribly controversial because there's plenty of records of this, was probably founded by demigods who were amphibians. I know that sounds really weird, but I mean that's it. That's true. These creatures were later called Oannes, and in actual Mesopotamian philosophy, or mythology, this being, or series of beings, actually, the first one was called Adapa. Now I'm going to read you a little bit about Adapa here, but this is not what I'm reading you is not something that's conjecture. This is from Oxford Royal Classics, Myths of Mesopotamia, and so this is pretty straight stuff here. Adapa was the first of the antediluvian seven sages who were sent by Ea, the wise god of Eridu, to bring the arts of civilization to mankind. Eridu was traditionally the earliest Mesopotamian city. In the Sumerian king list, it is the very first city to receive kingship from the gods in heaven. It lies at the head of the Arabian Gulf, originally beside the Euphrates River, not far from Ur of the Chaldees. Adapa was also known as Uan, which is the name given as Owanes by Berosus to the first sage. The name Uan also forms a pun on the Sumerian Akkadian word for a craftsman. Now, as the first sage, Adapa Owanes introduced the correct rites of religious service to mankind. He was a priest of Ea in his temple of Eridu, and the story explains how the first sage, like the subsequent six, angered Ea, so Adapa lost the chance to obtain immortality from the sky gods. And from Ra and Ashum II, we know that all the sages were banished from earth because they angered the gods and went back to the Apsu where Ea lived, and it is possible that the story, whose end is not extant, ended with Adapa's banishment. The Apsu was the home of the fresh water. The Apsu was the home of fresh water and the name of Ea's dwelling, and the sages are described elsewhere in Mesopotamian literature as pure Puda fish, possibly carp, a fish still kept as a holy duty in the precincts of Near Eastern mosques and monasteries. It is likely that Adapa as a fisherman was represented as a fish or fishman composite in ancient iconography, although definite identifications are hard to make. Now, I'm trying to be very, very conservative about this, but Adapa and the other fishmen were represented as men who were either in complete fish costumes as priests, which also represented amphibians or menfish. And there's numerous pictographs of this, ancient pictographs. And the idea was, the story went, that Adapa and the later menfish came out of the sea down there in the head of the Persian Gulf. They came out of the sea, and they instructed the original Sumerians, taught them how to build buildings and how to sow the grain and how to do all these things that civilized people do. And then after they would lecture and instruct and all of this, then these beings, these amphibians, would go back and spend the night sleeping in the deep. Well, that's the way the story goes. And so we have a precedent for this idea of the amphibian. By the way, I should certainly mention that Adapa and his various other amphibian demigods were definitely classified as Anunnaki, sky people. So if you buy into Sitchin, and I think Sitchin has a lot going for him, even though it's interpretive. But if you buy into Sitchin, then when as soon as you hear the word Anunnaki, you start thinking about spaceships. Well, okay. Something I want to point out along that line, and this may go a long way toward unconfusing some people about these how to interpret these myths. The Anunnaki and various other sky gods are also almost synonymous many times, including Dagon over in Canaan, with vegetation spirits and earth gods. Now, Dagon is referred to in Canaanite mythology as a vegetation god, and Thonian, an underworld figure. But here's the thing we have to remember. When the ancients in that period talked about the underworld, they quite often did not mean the underworld that we think of in Dante's Inferno or hell or some caverns below or things like that. That's not always what they meant. Quite often, what they really meant was that this is the underworld is where the sun and the moon and the stars go when they set behind the hills. And so you're really talking about outer space. You're talking about the sky below the hills. And this I know this is kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but that quite often is. I'll make it a little, give you an example that'll make it a little easier for you to understand. The 7 planetary demons from way back in Akkadian demonology, it goes one very, very early back, about 3,000 years back, 3,000 BC. These planetary demons, evil spirits, are called the Maskim. And the Maskim, there's a kind of a famous little kind of a verse about the Maskim that most magicians who have done any research on the dark side, they've run across this. It's that 7 they are born in the, now listen, 7 they are born in the bowels of the hills, evil ones, sowers of ills. Born in the bowels of the hills. And yet we're talking about planetary spirits. Well, obviously, if they're born in the bowels of the hills, what's meant by this is that they're coming up. If you look out on the horizon in the evening, you see them coming up out of the hills on the horizon in the sky. That's what's meant by that. So whenever you run into an earth god, a Chthonian god in really ancient mythology, you can start equating. You have to look at it 2 ways. Are we talking about a planetary spirit? Are we talking about something to do with the heavens? Or are we talking about something to do with something under the earth? Or are we, in fact, talking about both? Well, quite frankly, we could be very easily talking about both. And so, consequently, this means that we shouldn't worry too much about whether or not deity is described as Thonian or and also referred to as one of the sky people. Now, that said, let's look at very briefly the Hindu counterpart. Vishnu, one of the incarnations of Vishnu is said to spring out of a fish. And there's, I think, 6 other incarnations. The human embryo, of course, goes through a fish stage, as we know, and also a reptilian stage, or whatever. So you can use that analogy. Now we get into this African situation, and this gets controversial, but it's still very, very well worth mentioning. Down in the South Sahara, somewhere near Timbuktu, the Foreign Legion just recently rescued the library there. I hope that they still have it open. Timbuktu is a wonderful, wonderful library. The terrorists were, the Al-Qaeda types down there were going to burn everything. Oh, I hate those people. But anyway, the last minute, the Legion parachuted in and saved the library, so we can be thankful for that. Anyway, near Timbuktu is a tribe of black Africans who definitely have some connection with way back with ancient Egypt, or if not ancient Egypt, Nubia. Certainly the Nubian civilization south of Egypt, and these are remarkably. It's a tribe. You could say that they're sort of at a barbaric level, but then again, on the other hand, they have architecture. They have impressive mud buildings. They have sophisticated art style and decorative style, and they also have a very, very rich and complex mythology. Now, these people are called the Dagon. Now, I know that has no really, it sounds like it has a relation to Dagon, but actually it's probably just coincidence. But they're called the Dagon, and back in the 1930s, a French anthropologist by the name of Griot got in with them, and they're not an easy people to approach anthropologically. They're rather close-mouthed about their traditions, but Griot did the good anthropological thing. He stayed with them and learned their language and gained their confidence, and he gained, especially, and this is what's most important, he gained the confidence and became the confidant of their leading shaman, a man named Ogo Tamale. And Ogo Tamale, at a certain point, trusted Griot enough to give him complete, or as complete as anybody's ever gotten, lessons in the Dogon tradition. Now, there's a book, if you want to get it, called Conversations with Ogo Tamale, and this is really, really worth reading because Ogo Tamale was a very wise man and a very good magician. And he had some. This is like reading Castaneda, but more, Castaneda, but more authentic, because Ogo Tamale is talking directly to Griot. And now, in the course of giving all of this information to the anthropologist Griot, Ogo Tamale described that the Dogon were originally founded by these almost identical to the Adapa Awanas amphibious demigods that founded Sumer. And they were these amphibians that Tamale called the Omo. And these amphibians, supposedly, according to what Griot was able to put together from all of this, they came from a planet orbiting the double star of Sirius. Now, Sirius, as you know, very bright star, they're fairly close to us. And the Egyptians, of course, were very much into Sirius because they did their they're planting by the rising and falling, the rising and setting of Sirius, and so this is something that we have to take seriously. And so here is Hogotamele saying that the Omo come from Sirius, and he describes it, or at least Griot interpreted it, as being a double star. Well, they had, frankly, just about the same time Griot was doing this, they discovered that the astronomers discovered that Sirius really was a double star. And how did the Dagon know this? Or at least Griot thought that they knew this, and whatever. And so this became quite fascinating to Griot. Now, Griot, we have to admit that Griot was really he had a I won't call it political, but let's just call it a romantic desire to prove that these black Africans had really important, deep, sophisticated knowledge. He really wanted to prove that. He thought that they'd been, and you could have a lot of sympathy for that, because actually the black African culture down in that area has really been it's really been put down and disregarded. There are, Timbuktu, for good gosh, that's one of the, Timbuktu is like Tibet. I mean, and like those libraries in Ethiopia. I mean, these are people with a culture. These are people with a civilization. I mean, and you can't. So Griot he was anxious to prove that. Well, okay, so that was his bias. Well, all right, so the point that I'm making here is that yes, Griot had wanted to do this. He wanted to find this. So he published his findings, and then after World War II, a popular writer by the name of Temple got a hold of this material and published a book called The Sirius Mystery, which I read some years ago. It came out in 1976 or something like this. The Sirius Mystery. And Temple really, extrapolated on this and made the connections, of course, between the Dagon and the Oannes, Adapa situation, Anunnaki situation over in Sumer in Babylonia, and made these observations. Well, so look, for when Temple's book came out, it was a bestseller, and for quite a while, the Dagon, with their knowledge of the double star system of Sirius and all of this, they were being cited as the best evidence we had for an ancient extraterrestrial contact. Well, now, all right, obviously, if that's going to be the case, then there are going to be a whole array of people who are going to try to discredit this, because there are people who just absolutely are determined to debunk anything like this any way they can. I'm going to wax a little political now, but I think it's necessary to say this. Yes, Griot wanted to promote black African sub-Saharan civilization. He really did. And I think that's laudable. I think that's a laudable thing, because their civilization in that area has been overlooked and very definitely overlooked. So I'm sympathetic to Griot, but I do know that Griot was, what he's trying to promote. That was his agenda. Now, equally, regardless, without any racism involved in it, the Marxist archaeologists and anthropologists, of which there are a large number, both in America and in France, and especially in France, these people, they absolutely cannot stand anything to do with cultural diffusion or cyclic civilization theory. They become almost rabid when anybody presents anything like this. According to them, and their holy dogma in Marxist archaeology is that culture all over the world must evolve from the simple to the complex. There can be no such thing as an earlier civilization that knew as much or more than we know today, or even as much as we knew 200 years ago. They or 500 years ago or whatever. They cannot stand the cyclic theory because it refutes the whole Marxist idea of the evolution of culture from the simple to the complex. So they will do things, unbelievable things, like find evidence and actually destroy it. They do. In fact, there's a great French, a very famous French archaeologist who was infamous for that, Francois Bourd. He was just infamous for destroying evidence that didn't match Marx, his particular theory. So I'm not saying that this Van Beek, who went after Griol, was a Marxist. I don't know whether he was or not, but he went after Griol with all his knives sharpened, and he went down there and he got himself an informant. Meanwhile, Olga Tomeli, of course, had died. He got himself a Dagon informant, and his Dagon informant didn't know anything about Sirius, and so Van Beek published and tried to tear Griol apart, and to the point where we have to realize that somewhere between Griol's desire to promote sub-Saharan civilization and Van Beek's desire to trash Griol, somewhere in between there may lie the truth. However, just because, you see, Sirius, maybe they didn't know that Sirius was a double star. I mean, they might not have known that. But the very fact that they knew about Sirius indicates an Egyptian connection, and it doesn't discredit the idea of the Homo, of the amphibians. So all of this really amounts to a tempest in a teapot. And so you can't call Griol's work or Temple's work a hoax. But that's what the Skeptic magazine wants to say. And by the way, let me point out to you the origin of the word skeptic. All right? Are you ready for this? Okay. Skeptos was a little city-state in ancient Greece back in the time of Plato and Socrates and all those good old Greeks. And Skeptos was kind of a backwater. It was, and the people in Skeptos they had a tyrant, and they were not allowed or encouraged to think anything that wasn't in accordance with what they were told to think. And they were very critical of anybody else's ideas except their own ideas, which were rather limited, to the point where they became known all over Greece as being closed-minded and stupid. So when you called somebody a skeptic in ancient Greece, you were insulting them. You were. It was like calling somebody these days. It was like calling somebody a moron or you're and so here we have this word skeptic, and you think about the origin of it. I have to say this: the compulsion of these people to debunk this overwhelming amount of evidence that we have had in the past, and perhaps even has ongoing connections with otherworldly beings. Now, when I say otherworldly beings, I don't mean they necessarily have to come from other planets on a straight, slower than the speed of light travel or anything like that. I'm not saying that. In fact, Jacques Vallée's, who is the most accredited, in my opinion, researcher into UFO phenomena, Jacques Vallée is firmly convinced that these contacts, both ancient contacts and today, are interdimensional, not necessarily flat, straight lines, sublight travel from other planets. I think Jacques Vallée is right, and I think quantum physics these days is getting closer and closer and closer to making that more reasonable. Now, with that said, let's consider that these amphibians might very well, and I believe they did, because Atlantis, and that's another one, Atlantis, the A word. If I had uttered the A word when I was in graduate school and going for my master's degree in cultural anthropology, if I had uttered the A word, I probably would have been thrown out of the graduate program. Atlantis would literally make them see red. And yet, the evidence now for Atlantis is virtually overwhelming. And Atlantis was a maritime culture. It was a maritime culture back when the sea level was 200 feet lower. And so a lot of this Atlantean shore, colonies on the shore are already 200 feet underwater. But Atlantis was a maritime colony, and apparently they had a salmon run. That was their main. If you place Atlantis in the Atlantic south of England and west of Spain, which most people do, including Plato, the salmon run was what primarily sustained them. I might mention to you that there's a secret that you learn in anthropology and archaeology that that these debunkers really don't want you to know, and that is that you don't need agriculture for a civilization. All you need is a steady food supply at one point. That's all. If you have a steady food supply at one point, you could have civilization. So, Atlantis, that's why they call salmon the food of the wise, by the way. So, Atlantis was probably the first, they were probably the ones that were these amphibians from wherever they came from. Now, they may not have come from Sirius. They could have even come from somewhere inside this solar system. Sitchin is probably right about the asteroid belt being the remains of a planet that used to be there. And I want to mention this little point, that when Sitchin, they go to debunk Sitchin, people do, then I find some things about Sitchin that I think are a little bit out of line, but they go to debunk Sitchin and say, well, there isn't enough material in the asteroid belt to form a planet. Well, there will be in about 20 years from now, on the rate that we keep discovering more and more and more and more and cataloging more and more material. In 20 years, if we project the discovery of material correctly, in 20 years there will be enough to say that there was a planet there, and of course, so that when people start debunking like this, I mean, it really you wonder just where their heads are at. But anyway, so it could really these amphibians could come from somewhere in the solar system. They could have, and I think that they probably survived in Atlantis, and if you know Atlantis was very much of a maritime culture, and they had that Poseidonis is like a circular Venice. It had these canals all the way around in a circle, like a target configuration. And you could almost imagine, if you want to, you could imagine the amphibians, refugees, enjoying the canals of Poseidonis. And I like to think of that. And then, of course, when Atlantis sank, they could have gone out, and they would have been been able to aid the Sumerians and even the Egyptians and whatever. Now, I'm not a cultural diffusionist. I want to make that clear. I don't want to get into this idea that everything came from Atlantis or everything came from wherever, from one place. No, human beings are perfectly capable of inventing the flush toilet and the atomic bomb all by themselves. I don't think they need any extraterrestrial or ancient Atlantean information or teaching to do this. Human beings are ingenious, and they can do this themselves. But that doesn't mean, just because human beings are capable of all of this, it doesn't mean that Atlantis didn't exist, and it doesn't mean that we haven't been visited by extraterrestrials. Now, I want to discuss, as we said in the abstract, I want to discuss the concept of Dagon's reincarnation in later humans as a sort of a spiritual bloodline. Now, I want to make, when I say spiritual bloodline, I'm just using the word bloodline I'm just using it as a metaphor, because I don't mean that that the Homo, if you want to use the Dagon term, or the Adapa sky people, amphibians, I don't mean to think that they mated with the daughters of men or anything like that. Because come on, I mean, the chromosome difference would be so vast, and you can't. We can't even. Well, I don't know whether anybody's tried mating humans or chimpanzees. They shouldn't anyway, but I don't think you can. And in fact, if you isolated human beings for 1,000 years from other human beings, they couldn't actually have children, because by the 1,000 years of isolation, and that would be it. The chromosome change would be sufficient to. So consequently, this whole idea, when in the Book of Enoch and whatever in the Bible, where it says that the fallen angels mated with the daughters of men, no, they didn't. But what they probably did do is they did genetic engineering, and that I think we're pretty much aware. I mentioned there was a couple of geneticists at one of the major, biggest Ivy League universities, a couple of tenured geneticists who published, or tried to publish, the research that human DNA had been messed with at least twice in ancient times. And the way I understand that these two professors were well, one story is they lost their tenure, and I don't know whether it's that drastic, but they did. This is there's some suppressed knowledge here that our DNA really has been manipulated. So Sitchin's idea that the Anunnaki created us, of course that means the fallen angels from the Book of Enoch, and that would also include, to some degree, the amphibians, although I see them more as teachers and less as manipulators. But there is not much doubt that the gods, supposedly, at least in Sumerian and Mesopotamian mythology, the gods really were using men to work for them. And this isn't something this isn't just Sitchin's interpretation. In fact, I've been reading other versions of the text that Sitchin's been using just to see, because now the criticism of Sitchin is he's interpreting it his way. Yeah, sure, he reads Akkadian and he reads these texts, and yet he's been criticized for interpreting them in his way. Well, I've been reading other people's interpretations of these, and I don't think Sitchin's wrong. I think he's right. But maybe they weren't after gold, and maybe they were. Now, one thing you got to think about, gold, and this is something a lot of people don't know, gold is not native to this earth. Gold, every bit of gold on this planet came from somewhere in outer space. Long, long time ago, yes. But it was not generated on this planet. It is a very unique, magical, and a very powerful, incorruptible metal. And according to Sitchin, that's what the Anunnaki did. They wanted human beings to mine gold for them, and created human beings as an intelligent workforce. And when you start reading these, even the other versions of the Sumerian texts where people are not trying to prove this, it kind of looks like Sitchin might be right. And so I think that these amphibious Anunnaki may have come from the same planet that Sitchin's talking about, Nibiru, or they could come from somewhere else. And I have an idea myself, and I'm not going to mention where I think they come from. It's not serious, but and of course, as I say, I don't take that seriously, but they may come from somewhere else inside this solar system. In line with that, we have placed Dagon in our Phoenician pantheon, and we placed Dagon in Hesed on the Tree of Life. Now, Hesed is, of course, the sphere on the Tree of Life represents rulership and majesty, and it's attributed to the planet Jupiter, as it should be, which is the king of the planets, of course. And so we placed Dagon there. Now, Dagon, of course, is the father of Baal, and we placed Atlantis there too, also as a sort of a paradisial, iconic topos. And I point out that Dagon also represents Capricorn, the fish goat, which just happens to be in the ancient initiatic code is referred to as the gate of the gods. Now, one more thing I'd like to leave you with, and I hope this will kind of tickle some people, and maybe you made me laugh about it, but Frank Herbert came up with a very, very, very influential and classical science fiction novel, series of novels actually, called Dune, which David Lynch made, I think, a very fine film out based on that. Now, Dune was supposed to take place many thousands of years in the future, when the galaxy was virtually inhabited, planets in the galaxy, and in Dune, the way space was warped so that planetary travel between the worlds could occur in a usable time frame without having to go into suspended animation for 20 years just to get from one star to another. In order to do this, this group of human beings would take enough of this psychedelic spice, the space melange, to alter their consciousness and keep altering their consciousness until finally they got to the point where they're no longer human and they have super brains that can literally warp space with their minds. And they could, not only could they do this, but they could take a whole ship, a whole huge spaceship, and send it from one solar system to another with the power of their minds. Now, of course, this is a very hermetic concept because in hermetic science we say, well, like you're the center of the universe, or you're the center of your universe, and your universe is the big universe if you're able to grasp it, and as above, so below, and you can go anywhere and do anything. This is a hermetic concept. I'm sure that Herbert got it originally from that. But the point being that in that wonderful classic film that David Lynch did, in the beginning of the film, they wheel in one of these advanced navigators, and he's a creature like a big whale. He looks very much like a bottlenose whale, and he has very wise eyes, but he's in this tank, and he comes in and tells the Emperor, telepathically tells the Emperor what he's got to do, and of course, assassinate poor Paul Atreides or whatever. But this is the way I personally think of Dagon as reincarnating way up in my ascent chakra, behind the third eye, and is this very benign, very wise, whale-like creature in a tank who communicates with me telepathically. Now, I didn't get the idea from Dune, but I mean that is the way I picture it, and I think sharing that image with you, perhaps you appreciate it. But what if these creatures? Think about it this way: if these creatures died here and they had no place to go, they couldn't reincarnate back on their own planet because it's gone, and they died here, then they would reincarnate here. And those of us who resonated with them, and those of us who were attuned with them, we would be perhaps the people that they would reincarnate in as an aspect of our psychic personality. So this was what I mean by a spiritual bloodline. It's not really a bloodline, no, but it's a spiritual. Shall we say, a spiritual legacy. So I feel like I've got that myself, but I don't want to try to make anybody believe that if they don't want to. But even if it's not true, or even if it has no basis, it's useful. It's very, very useful. And like Tibetan Buddhism, the Tibetan lamas will tell you, well, these gods, they're not real, but then nothing else is real either. So if these gods are useful to you, then create them. Well, I enjoy Dagon. I really do, and he kind of teaches me things. So that's where where I'm at with Dagon, and you'll be there too if you want to be. Just kind of look inside yourself, back there behind your third eye, and see maybe you. That's why I said in the abstract, I said, okay, so tune in and find out what might be swimming in your think tank. and anyway, but that's another good reason to master our Hermetic Yoga system, so you can get in contact with with these marvelous God forms, and it doesn't really matter whether they're real or not, and it doesn't really matter whether we have raped mythology and raped history, like Alexander Dumas said. What matters is it right for you, and does it work? That's the important thing. Anyway, next week, I would like to do. Actually, I'd like to do. Hopefully, Timothy Willie's Return of the Rebel Angels, which I've been reading. And this book is right down our alley. And Timothy Willie, as you remember, he did the book on Process Church and the Final Judgment. He's one of the founders of it, and he's a maestro. And oh boy, he really is. He's over in New Mexico, and he is really one terrific spiritual avatar, and a wonderful writer too, by the way. So hopefully we'll have Return of the Rebel Angels next week, and hopefully we'll get Maestro Timothy to come on board. So until then, good magic, and we'll see you then. Bye.